and we're rolling. So welcome. My name is Lisa Nelson. For those of you, I guess everybody probably has met me already, but I wanted to take a minute and introduce the rest of the folks on the MaxMD team who are here with us today, and then we'll just go around the room and introduce everybody from the payer side. Why don't you roll? Scott, if you want to introduce, and then we'll go around the room with the MaxMD guys.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Finley. I'm the founder and CEO of MaxMD.
Hi, I'm Bruce Schreiber. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at MaxMD. I'm also Chairman of the Board of Direct Trust.
Keith?
And I'm Keith Finley at MaxMD. I'm a business development at MaxMD.
Awesome. And Nick, why don't we start with you? We'll just use the panel there of participants to tell the order.
Sure. Hello, this is Nick Radov. I'm a technologist at United Healthcare, working primarily with HL7 standards and clinical data acquisition. I've been one of our representatives on the Da Vinci project since the beginning.
Super, thanks. Tammy?
Tammy Banks, Optum 360, working with Da Vinci and PT FHIR.
Super. I missed Linda. Go ahead, Linda.
Everybody knows me. Now, I'm Linda Michelson. I'm the interoperability community of practice lead for Optum and United, and I work with Nick a lot, and my day job is Optum 360 ODX, and I work with Tammy as well, and on Da Vinci, I'm a co-lead for MRP.
Excellent. Yamini?
Hi, this is Yamini Damodaran from the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, and I'm an enterprise architect.
Excellent.
Lisa,
and I think that
Lisa,
Matt Schuler is there.
Yep,
there you go, Matt.
I am.
Super.
Again, I don't know what's going on at my go-to meeting, but it brings up my my colleague's name instead of my name. So I haven't been able to figure out how that's happening. So I have to probably change my account or something. But good afternoon, everyone. Matt Schuler, Director of Health IT at the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, and a member of the Da Vinci Operating Committee.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Matt, was there anybody else from your team joining, or is this everybody?
I think this is everybody.
Okay, super. So thanks very much for giving me some time out of your day today to talk about the value proposition for using Direct Trust with FHIR and SMART on FHIR. I wanted to start with a brief introduction about MaxMD. I know folks have a little bit of exposure to us, but I'll make that very quick and painless. If you have any questions, you can stop me, but otherwise I'll just go through that very quickly, and then we'll move on to the, to the core reason why we're getting together today. Just for those who don't know, MaxMD is a systems innovator who's been involved with Direct Trust since pretty much the very beginning, 2010, and we were one of just 3 organizations nationwide to be the first to achieve HISP, RA and CA certification from ENAC back in 2013. So we've been working with Direct Trust for a very long time. As Bruce said, he is our newly elected chairman of the board for Direct Trust, and MaxMD is very heavily involved on many of the communities within Direct Trust that work to develop and support this standard. Most of you know me from HL7, my work on CDA, and my work with FHIR, and we are also very heavily involved as an organization with the standards that are being developed nationwide. Our products are all ONC certified, and our customer base is very large. It looks just like the healthcare industry. Over 4,000 clients in all 50 states, representing all of the major stakeholders that are involved in healthcare information exchange. Our products are certified with the, I'm going so quickly I can't even keep up with my own notes. We are 100% interoperable with the Direct Trust Accredited Trust Bundle and the Governmental Trust Anchor Bundle. What that means and what this slide shows, it's actually a grid with all the HISPs down the left and across the top. So the intersection shows and confirms those green squares confirms the interoperability HISP to HISP in all of those spots. So MaxMD is 100% interoperable with all the other Direct Trust accredited HISPs, and this means that basically there's connectivity to over 1.7 million identity-proofed healthcare professionals at over 120,000 organizations nationwide, plus 250,000 consumers who already have Direct Trust addresses. Basically, what we do is provide lightweight health information exchange services. This is a secure push kind of technology that is much less resource intensive than the kinds of pull technologies that healthcare seems to sustain itself on right now. There's one-to-many interface, so it really reduces the number of direct connections that need to be present, and it also gives that instant interoperability with that whole slew of LOA3 identity-proofed individuals I talked about earlier. This is enabling smarter workflows, and it's payload agnostic. So absolutely any kind of data, whether it's a V2 message, a CDA document, FHIR resources, they can all be shared using this same platform. And that's what MaxMD is really all about. We've done exactly what the ONC challenged organizations to do: take the direct protocol and innovate on top of it. And we have built integration engines, rules engine, our natural language processing capabilities, digital signature, some support for very large payload files like DICOM images through a fragmentation process, and now recently direct to FHIR interaction. So that's what MaxMD does. That's what Direct Trust is all about. And it's really why I wanted to get you guys together today as organizations involved in the Da Vinci initiative, so that you could have more information about the value that Direct Trust brings to what Da Vinci is trying to do. You know, I was up in Boston with all of you guys working on our use cases a couple weeks ago, very well aware of the opportunity that Da Vinci is providing for stakeholders of all types, really, not just payers, but providers and health IT vendors, a whole sort of industry cooperation to come together and demonstrate how we can use FHIR and FHIR resources to be able to improve patient care outcomes, support clinical decision-making, and really demonstrate an open source environment that's facilitating this kind of interoperability. And that's really what Direct Trust is all about, because this is an existing standard that Da Vinci can bring to bear on the problems that we as an initiative are trying to solve. So there's 3 use cases that are kicked off already, the red ones in the top, and one new one, the light blue one on the left in the middle, around health record exchange to support quality measurement, the HEDIS program. But all of these use cases and the deliverables to not only create guidance, but to rapidly turn that into reference implementations, pilots, and then real production solutions. That's the pressure that Da Vinci is under. And that need is what really creates the value that Direct Trust brings to the equation. So when you are using Direct Trust, this means that implementations can happen faster and easier, because this is reusing a proven standard that already exists and is ready to roll right now. It reduces implementation and maintenance costs because of using lower cost, non-persistent, secure connections that often are already in place with all of those connectivity points that I already described. It's also less expensive. I wanted to make one other point here. Let me see if I can find where I am. The faster and the easier part, I wanted to just put a little size and scope on that by saying that in July of 2014, MaxMD interfaced 41 hospitals in 1 month. That's what I'm talking about, from testing to implementation, not just EMRs. Because this is the kind of rapid rate that integration could happen with any kind of system. That's how fast this is. And in terms of reducing the costs, you think about point-to-point interfaces, maybe somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 per side, When you can reduce the number of VPN connections and you can utilize a technology that can bring in interoperability at like pennies per user per day, or in a transaction-based model, fractions of a penny per transaction, this is really something that brings down cost. It also makes the barrier for starting a pilot much lower because you're starting on the really bottom end of a huge scale. And so when you're just doing low volumes in the beginning where there's a lot of risk, the cost is very low. And it lines up, the cost curve lines up very well with the implementation staging. So greater simplicity. This is an off-the-shelf sort of solution that's ready to roll, and there's a single standard federated trust agreement that simplifies all of the complexities around data use and reuse sharing agreements. So not just from a technology point of view, but from a governance and a management point of view, a lot more simplicity. We talked about scalability in terms of the ability to roll to many addresses because of what's available. But when this infrastructure gets laid down, it's not just the communication that is enabled initially by the pilot that's being proven. It means that all of those endpoints can now communicate to each other. So the scale is tremendous. And the flexibility, because of the payload agnostic point of view, is just, it's almost unimaginable what you can do with direct trust connectivity once you have it. This addresses some very important gaps that DaVinci is facing right now. Number one is this issue of how do we get trusted identities into the systems that we're building. And Direct Trust provides LOA3 identity-proofed accounts for every individual with a Direct Trust address. This is the certificate infrastructure that's needed to support authorization and access control that we know needs to be in place for the kind of data that we're working with. It also brings a directory solution to place that you'll hear a little bit more. I'll have Bruce talk about that as we go through some of the capabilities. That's the big picture. Yeah, that's the big picture. And Matt, what's your, or Nick, do you have a question?
Real quick, it's Matt, and it's a question. Lisa, you referenced that again, this is new space to me, and an excellent overview so far for me. We use the example of connecting 41 hospitals. So now that they're connected, like, give me an example of why that's a milestone, or explain a little bit why that's a milestone. Because what type of information are they exchanging? Are they just saying that they can at least identify and recognize that that is a hospital facility institution?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then Scott or Bruce can fill in where I leave off. So one use case would be connectivity to be able to share ADT messages. These are event notifications when somebody is admitted or discharged from the hospital. You can get that message pinged right out to organizations that need it. CDA documents are being shared, so instead of just a rudimentary sort of discharge ADT, you can actually be sharing the discharge summary produced as a CDA document. And then the organizations that are integrated to on the receiving side, that means that they're receiving this information and automatically incorporating it, bringing it into their EMR. So while it's
I just want to make sure I was in the right zone.
Messaging system that works like email sort of, and with an interface like that, it can be directly connected end to end, edge to edge.
Yeah,
anything, Scott or Bruce, you want to add?
Sure, Lisa. I like to say that the ONC gave us two major gifts. Gift number one is the direct protocol, which is a secure, it's founded on a secure, secure health transport. Second is the clinical data architecture, CDA, which is a standardized format for transporting medical records. As part of meaningful use, the ONC required that all EHRs that use an accredited EHR, a certified EHR, and as part of the certification process, you needed to be able to demonstrate that you could transport messages, transport CDA architecture via direct. Specifically, you were required on discharges to transport a transition of care document via direct in 50% of your discharges in order to get reimbursed. And so hence the push to implement direct, hence the push to set up the messaging component of your EHR and to interoperate. Scott, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. Look, I think the big thing, connecting to a hospital is pretty simple. It could happen literally. We've done it as fast as a couple of hours, but it's ability to share a structured payload through the same channel that you could share an unstructured payload. So CDA architecture is very clever. We can take it from one system, give it to another system, let it consume it, but we can leverage that channel. So I think those are the things that are important to think about when you think about direct. It's not just an EMR that we can hook up to. We can hook up to virtually any type of platform and do it very quickly.
I'll just add one more thing, Matt, on top of that. Think about how this works, because it's so different. And that is that the rules engine that delivers information where it needs to go can be smart enough to say, hey, the receiver doesn't have a system to consume CDA documents. So to that receiver, we will send a PDF document. And to the receiver that's got the integrated system, we will send a structured CDA and anything in between. It's really geared to be able to distribute the data in whatever way that is the preference of the receiver. And that's pretty amazing. And it gives you a glide path to bring more people into a pilot who have different levels of capability, because you don't have to say you have to be at ability before you can get started. You can get started with whatever level of consumption you're ready for, and without changing the infrastructure tiniest bit, you can evolve from PDF to CDA to FHIR resources. It's really the same infrastructure can support your growth path the whole way.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so Bruce, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We have a few technical slides to get into the details about how Direct Trust works to do some of these things. And if you guys have questions, I think just like Matt just did, just jump in and we'll do our best to address them.
All right, so the Direct Trust network has been operational since 2013 and has shown remarkable growth. The latest metrics are actually a little bit stronger than this slide shows. It's 1.7 million trusted direct addresses at this time, all of them LOA3 identity proofed. About 120,000 healthcare organizations participate in this network, and in the fourth quarter of 2017 there were 46 million transactions. The number was higher in the first quarter of 2018. I don't have that number available. But the important concept here, when we move to the Smart on FHIR and the new technology, is every technological system has an authentication and authorization problem that needs to be solved. In Direct, we have solved this. We solved this by identity proofing right now 1.7 million individuals and giving them credentials. We want to be able to leverage this trust framework for FHIR. Next slide. So authentication is who you are, and what we want to do is create a global authorization technique. Authorization is local, authentication is global. Authentication who you are, authorization is what is this person allowed to do. So with the Direct Trust Network, we want to be able to create a single digital identity for participants in the network, and then have this identity be recognized by all of the FHIR resources across the country. And this diagram is how that would set up. Essentially, a user signs on to an access coordination site, which invokes the identity services in the OAuth server or the Smart on FHIR server, and that uses the credentials that are created in the Direct Trust network. Every Direct Trust HISP is associated with a a registration authority and a certificate authority, and those entities know the identity of the users. All of these users have been identity proofed, and there are artifacts on file telling everyone who they are. The individual identity is not embedded in the certificate, but can be provided by the CARA combination to the OAuth server and signed by that certificate, so that you know there's provenance of this identity information. You know where it came from. So the user signs on and gets a token. It requests FHIR access. The FHIR resource flips you to the OAuth server. The OAuth server does its thing and validates the digital identity of this individual, produces a token, and then delivers the token to the FHIR system. The FHIR system then does its enforcement activity. It now knows who the digital identity is. This is Lisa Nelson that's coming in. I know who Lisa Nelson is, and I know what she's allowed to do. So I will allow her to do whatever I allow her to do. Different system might allow her to do different other things. So again, we're saying that authentication should be federated and global. Authorization is a local process. The policy decision service is the local function managed and controlled by the local FHIR resource. And that's really an important concept because we're not trying to federate the consent and the authorization. We're trying to federate the identity. If you want a single sign-on, and that's what we're trying to get here, you have to have a federated identity service, we're suggesting that let Direct Trust be your OAuth server, or the Direct Trust members be your OAuth server. Without this, we're back to having different credentials at every access point, leading to password proliferation and credential proliferation, which is the world we live in today. We're trying to solve that problem. Next slide, Lisa. So one of the other things that we... Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Yamini from the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. Can you please go to the previous slide? Okay, on this, I'm basically understanding that Direct Trust is more of an authentication identity management framework that works across various different interoperability mechanisms. I'm wondering if this uses OAuth and identity services and a policy decision service. How is this different from just using OAuth and maybe attribute-based access control? That was my first question. And the second question is, what are the major benefits of using the Direct Trust framework?
So the major benefits of using the Direct Trust framework is federated identity. That's the answer to your second question. The answer to your first question is this can be an OAuth service, so the answer to the first question is it can be the same as. The key here is that in today's implementation world, each hospital is standing up a FHIR server, and then they're standing up their own OAuth server. And so really all you're doing is proliferating passwords and credentials. If I need to access two different hospitals, I need to hospital FHIR servers. I need to have two different identities, one at each of them. And what we're proposing here is let's take advantage of the federated identity framework that Direct Trust offers. Let's stand up a single digital identity for providers that are members of the Direct Trust network, and let's have the FHIR services recognize those digital identities. It's a three-legged process. Step number one is the provider needs to have a relationship with the FHIR server. With the FHIR resource. Step number two, the provider needs to have a relationship with Direct Trust and its OAuth server. And step number three, the FHIR resource has to have a relationship with the OAuth server. And that's standard OAuth. The point, though, is that the huge benefit here is the provider can have a single digital identity that federates across multiple systems. So that if he has a relationship with multiple hospitals or multiple entities that are in this network, and they don't have to be hospitals and they don't have to be FHIR servers, he has a single identity that federates across all of them. The provisioning process is he creates this identity. Direct Trust knows him. Then he goes to process number one. He says, I want to use my Direct Trust identity to register for your service. He registers for the service, and he process number two, same step. Process number three, same step. And so he can now use this singular identity to access multiple processes. Does that answer your question?
There's another benefit. There's another benefit, and that is identity proof to NIST LOA 3 at the inception of his direct when he gets a direct address. So that's a pretty high level of identity proofing that gets federated across.
So just if I can summarize, so I'm sure that I've understood it correctly. This framework, basically the Direct Trust framework, is a unique framework that can work in a closed network, and it promotes reusability and federated identity. Mm-hmm. Did I say that correctly?
Yes.
I
yes,
see.
You did.
Okay,
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Next slide. So, as part of our initiative to innovate on Direct, we wanted to take advantage of the LOA 3 identity available with patients, patient direct addresses. And so we said, well, how could a patient retrieve their own medical records from a FHIR API via Direct? Well, we've registered them at an LOA 3 level. We know who they are. Why not push out a payload, which is a FHIR query, and a second payload on the same message, which is an identity record for the patient, send it to another HISP, and where the HISP has a direct address, which is a front end for the FHIR server. It receives the payload and receives both payloads. It recognizes that this is a patient, recognizes that a patient has an unequivocal right to retrieve their own medical record data from any medical record system that is holding their data. And so it does a query to the FHIR API, says, I've got Lisa Nelson here, her birth date is XYZ, her address is ABC. Let's do a patient match using your proprietary patient matching algorithm inside your API, and find the record. The FHIR API reports back the local record ID of the patient. We insert that patient ID into the payload, which is the FHIR query, and execute the FHIR query. We retrieve back the response from the medical record system and send it back via Direct to the original HISP. Message delivery is rules driven. It's definable for each recipient. It's a channel that that just it works. We can send the patient can query 5 different FHIR APIs and retrieve their messages without having to re-register at every single place. Takes
and
advantage
it's not
of,
just for patients. I would say, Bruce, it's also, in the context of what DaVinci is doing, it's providers can be using this technology, or really anyone that needs to have an easy way to access some HIT system that's got a FHIR API to interface with.
That's exactly right. So we can use the same payload, dual payload, with a modification on the identity message, meaning carry both the direct message with the query, and carry the identity information.
Using some of the terms that are used in DaVinci, when we looked at use case 4, 3 or 4 different sub-use cases emerged out of there, and what do people want to be able to do to share information so that they can use it for clinical care management or for HEDIS quality measure. This notion of an unsolicited communication where you're just pushing information that needs to go somewhere, or solicited communication where you're asking for certain information and then it's being returned to you, as well as the traditional query kind of models. These are the capabilities that I hear people in DaVinci saying that they need to demonstrate at the most fundamental level, and this is what Direct Trust can easily support already.
So basically, to summarize this is a secure push enabling a pull. And we can have a provider pull a patient record this way as well. That's okay. Push beats pull in every other market, and push technology is more versatile. Essentially, the key here is that the person initiating the transaction is identified, is a known entity, and so a lot of the authorization and authentication problems are simplified by that. Let's continue.
Okay.
Next slide. So Lisa mentioned to me that one of the issues that the DaVinci project is facing is how do we find people? Direct Trust has a robust direct directory, and I wanted to show you a couple of the interface slides that a couple of slides with the MaxMD interface on it. Essentially, if you have a direct address with MaxMD, you have access to the direct directory. If you have a direct address with other HIS, they will provide you with access to the direct directory. The direct directory currently has 740,000 direct addresses in it. Most of them have MPI numbers and have, well, they're all provider addresses at this time. They span 50 states, and if you go to the Direct Trust website, you can see a pin map of what it looks like. It looks like healthcare, essentially, as Scott said earlier. Or actually, Lisa said that earlier. Next slide.
Hey, before you leave that, I have a couple of questions on that. On the directory, do you propose that the FHIR endpoints would be in that directory too, so that we could? Yeah. Is that okay? And then the other question I have is, okay, go ahead.
Go to the next slide.
Am I getting ahead of you? Oh, sorry. I have a knack for that. Go ahead.
Let me hold, Linda. Let me hold your question until I go through the next two slides, and then we'll talk about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, what we've done here is we've built a filtering and searching mechanism for the directory, so that yes, it lists 740,000 direct addresses and their owners, but you don't. It's not indexed only on the direct address. We have there are 4 drop downs here, which basically highlight any one of the fields that are in the directory. And so in our interface, you can search on any of 26 data elements. And Lisa, if you scroll to the next screen, it gives you a clearer picture of what's in the directory, which unfortunately is a little bit hard to read. But it tells you who the HISP is, tells you who the direct address is, and then the provider name, NPI number. The UID is just a record ID, doesn't matter. Then a class specialty, coding, organizational information, organizational NPI number if it's available, organizational address, and then phone number, fax, class, and specialty. This information is submitted by all of the HISPs. We are in the process of improving the quality of the data. There's work being done in that area as well. And we have Direct Trust has just implemented version 2 of what we call the data aggregation service, aggregating the data from the contributing HISPs. And the benefit of version 2 is it moved us to a place where we could customize the directory more. We could add more data elements and provide more flexibility. So in answer to your question, Linda, yes, we can add an electronic service indicator field to this database and display it. And that's where we would put the FHIR endpoint. And yes, that can be done very quickly and federated across all the HISPs.
So it could be the endpoint for either payers or providers.
Yes, absolutely.
Any
And it
FHIR
could even
endpoint,
be more specific
essentially.
down, it could be
Got
any
it.
FHIR endpoint down to a very specific channel use.
I see. That makes that makes a lot of sense. So if you're not hitting it, yeah, I get it.
Like queues that are designed to process certain range of things, you know, so it gives a lot of flexibility for being able to find the right endpoint for the task that you're hoping to interact with them on.
Or the operation you're trying to interact with? If
Or the
you're
operation.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So just a couple of summary points on the Direct Directory. This is a national directory, which might be interesting to payers just because your business takes you across the whole country, and it includes all kinds of stakeholders, even operational endpoints for systems. And it's ready. You know, this is a proven and available kind of thing, off the shelf, ready to go. There are, I think, important from an operational point of view, there's update processes, mature update processes that are in place, a support organization that takes care of this directory. And I think this addresses a critical need that DaVinci has for how to find these interoperability endpoints, like Linda's asking about. So this solution could easily integrate with other directories if new or other directories were to be invented over time. So it's not a solution that precludes other things from happening, but this is something that exists today. So it's important, and like Scott mentioned earlier, a real differentiator is having an identity that is not just of questionable value, but an identity where you can say with a very high level of assurance, this person is who this person is. And
Lisa, it's Matt.
Yeah,
just
go ahead, Matt.
one quick question, and I know you're always good and you can take this offline with me, but the work that's going on with the Tiger teams and directories and all that stuff, is this the direction and the pathway that they're going, or am I in a totally outer space here?
I'm not on the Tiger team. Bruce, do you go on those? I mean,
yes, I am on the Tiger teams. Jim Fisher's on the Tiger teams. Basically, Direct Trust has a huge representation on the Tiger teams. There is a member of Direct Trust
excellent
on every one of the Tiger teams, and we're paying a lot of attention to it. Bob Dietely is essentially, Bob and Rim, I believe, are coordinating that group. But the major source of data in existence today is the NPES and the Direct Trust directory, and we're working to make sure that they're in sync with each other and that they complement each other. Whether the end product of the Tiger teams is not clear right now, whether the government will sponsor a national directory or just sponsor a framework for it, which Direct Trust will follow. We'll wait and see. But we have a head start. We have, as I said, 1.7 million accounts with close to half of them in our directory with lots of information. And we've built a structure that is flexible and can be enhanced. It's
excellent. That's exactly where I was going. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Great question, Matt.
I have sort of a follow-on on that. With TEFCA, has Direct Trust decided what they think their role may be in that, or are you waiting for the final, what do you call it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question that we've been discussing at the board of directors at every meeting. The short answer is no one knows where TEFCA is taking us.
True.
And there are 3 organizations right now that are applying for or intend to apply for and compete for the RCE role. Direct Trust wants to be the trust framework for whichever is the ultimate RCE, and so we're talking to everybody. We're telling them what we've got and why we think we're strong, and we expect to be involved in that process when that process actually comes to life. Right now, our understanding is that there will be an RFP or an RFI for the RCE towards the end of the year, probably December, January timeframe. Some of this has been thrown up in the air because the woman who was responsible for TEFCA has moved over to the VA, and she's no longer working with the ONC. So there's some question as to what type of momentum TEFCA has. Genevieve Morris moved from the ONC. Yes, she's working for the VA now.
Yeah, she got a nice new promotion. If you saw that, Linda, she's the czar of VA EHRs, right?
Wow.
She's responsible for the VA EHR implementation right now. And so a lot of the momentum for TEFCA is up in the air because she was the driving force. So we'll see where it goes.
Oh, did not know that.
So
I didn't know that either.
Closing recap thoughts on this really is, I think DaVinci's at a really important point in its life cycle, moving from just sort of designing guidance into deploying reference implementations. And it's an important time to really take stock of the assets that are available to make this a great success. And some of the strengths of Direct Trust, utilized through partnering with MaxMD and other Direct Trust HISPs, can make a big difference in terms of DaVinci's ability to implement quickly and make it as easy as possible, keep costs low for people who are beginning to be involved and get engaged, reduce complexity wherever and as many places as possible, because we know that this is challenging, and so part of the real value is making it easier and simpler, and then building something that is not just a solution for right now for a single or a handful of use cases, but something that's really scalable and flexible to take a reference implementation and say, now we see the pattern, this can be applied in so many more places. And of course, bite off the parts that are still a challenge, but put some solutions in place that address this gap around identity and around being able to feasibly find the interoperability endpoints that we need to facilitate communication between. So I'm hoping that this jolt of or injection of information will really open your eyes and get DaVinci thinking about ways that we could utilize these capabilities to make our reference implementations more successful. And you guys have been doing a great job of question and answers all along the way, but just wondering what else might be on your mind and how we can help.
I think as far as the reference implementation goes, that would have to go through DaVinci formally. In thinking about what we've done so far, we've been sort of agnostic to how you get the stuff around, right? We've said, here's an endpoint, we're going to define these operations, these profiles, but we, just like Argonaut, we have not gone out and said how you do it beyond that point. That's my first thought.
I mean, we had sort of assumed that we would, be using the REST API, perhaps extended with some additional operations, and then we also, sort of moved on and talked about using CDS hooks as well. I know those things are not like directly comparable, but in terms of, getting stuff around, that's what we had discussed in some of the breakout meetings.
Well, Nick, let me ask a little bit more about that, because my familiarity with CDS hooks, when I look at the CDS hook specs, that's a Word document that kind of waves its hands at suggested behaviors that you would do on patient view or something like that. But it's describing an action that would take place based upon some triggering event. But
right.
It doesn't really give much in the way of specific practical guidance to help leverage implementations into really doing it. And I think that's, one of the struggles, at least that I find being involved in pilots, is we do a good job of designing the data structures and the information that we want to share and what we want to do with it when we're sharing it. And then we get out into the field and try and make it go. And all of these practical problems just bog us down. And when I'm working with a pilot that is enabled by direct trust, we don't go slower when we get to that point. We go faster. And I wish Linnell James was on the phone, but about 3 or 4 FHIR Connect-a-thons ago, I think I got an award for generating more artifacts on FHIR servers at the Connect-a-thon than anyone else.
Yep.
And
Yep.
in the way that I did it was I just unburdened myself with all of the underlying challenges of how am I going to get the data there. And I was using direct trust to just process right to an endpoint. And I went, you know, it was remarkable. But when I had that experience, it really opened my eyes to say how easy this could be.
And to be clear, I'm not at all opposed to looking at additional options. I was just kind of contradicting Linda's point a little bit. And sorry, Linda, but it just, you know, when you say we hadn't really discussed how to get this, you know, the data back and forth, we did at least have sort of a working assumption, at least in
we're on different use cases, right?
Yeah, more so, I guess, on the coverage requirements discovery, and so that those were the approaches we had discussed so far. But we're not necessarily locked into those, and there's certainly still time to consider other options, I think.
And I'm not sophisticated on CDS hooks either, but I got the idea that it was a back and forth. Is that true, Nick, from what you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really a CDS hooks expert, but I think you know, if we were to really leverage it for the coverage requirements discovery use case, we might actually have to even define a new hook, for at least, you know, for some of the stuff.
But I'm just wondering, I guess the reason I raised that is, can direct trust do that back and forth negotiation that you may need
that's
to
what
do?
I was thinking. You know, I think of it I think of it as a way of defining an expected behavior that happens when a triggering event occurs. And we talked about event notifications before, but the rules engines that the rules engine that knows what to do when an event occurs, being able to get information that says, an event occurred, okay, a discharge, let's say, and now the arrival of a message becomes the event that triggers arrival of a certain type of message, triggers the activity that's been defined for that CDS hook to happen. And maybe queries are done as a result of that, or data is pushed somewhere as a result of that. But the execution of what you document, the vision that you write down in the CDS hook, has to be executed by somebody. And this technology is very well suited for that.
Sure. Yeah, fair enough.
What else is on your mind?
I'm going to be quiet.
So as you said, somebody mentioned, I'd like Linnell to see this, and it, I forget, has Lloyd McKenzie seen this this stuff as well? You know, you guys are my first round outside of discussing this with Linnell. You guys are my first round of stakeholders that Linnell kind of handpicked and said, hey, you know, try the idea out on these guys and see what they think. So you're my next round of let's think about this together with a little bit larger group and figure out where it might make sense to use some of this. Yeah. In terms of, you know, sending stuff out and getting it back, the only concern that might come up is just the latency in terms of the transport and the turnaround. If you're going through this channel as opposed to a sort of immediate, more or less real-time service. Is that, am I making sense there?
I understand the question. Bruce, do you have any experience with the issue of turnaround time, latency?
I have lots of experience with it. Thank you. So the concept that that a FHIR service is synchronous and therefore instantaneous versus a direct message is asynchronous and therefore there's a lot of latency is a bit of a misnomer. There's no guarantee of the response time of a FHIR service in the first place, and
sure, I understand. I mean, it's in the end, it's just a matter of being able to, meet the sort of expected service levels as a practical matter. I don't necessarily think that one is faster than the other, but just want to make sure that there's some reasonable expectation that we could, get to where we need to be.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Our experience with direct is that it's fast. It's a lightweight network, and the messages travel in seconds and get processed and responded to in seconds.
Okay.
Just a point of clarification for me. This is Tammy. One is not dependent on the other, right? So if you use the identity aspects, you don't have to exchange information using direct messaging. You could also use other types of standards, right? They do stand independently.
That is absolutely correct. You can use the direct trust and identity framework with synchronous query. That's correct.
And so if I wanted to use the identity and I wanted to do a direct FHIR connect with Epic, I'm just throwing a scenario out. But then for those who have practice management systems I don't necessarily have a relationship, I could use the other direct messaging if my internal systems could support that. I got this down right?
Sure. Yeah, you got it right.
Okay. And again, I'm just kind of new to the game, but if I want to connect with someone who doesn't have direct, and again, that would be a rare occurrence, I have a feeling, how would the authentication work? Because it's based on the direct messaging, right? Address?
So yes, it's based on the direct messaging address and direct messaging federated identity. And so the same question gets asked, you should ask is, if somebody doesn't have access to the FHIR server, how do they get access to the FHIR server? They create an account. They create an identity. And so if someone doesn't have a direct address and wants to use the system, they need to be provisioned into the system. And if we're using the direct trust framework, I would say they need to go get a direct trust identity. They're not expensive, and there'll be lots of motivation for doing it. I mean,
it scales.
If I can have a single, it scales. If I can have a single identity across all of healthcare, that's the issue. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm learning. This is just a naive question, so don't.
No naive questions. It's a good question. It's good questions. We're not naive. That's a great question.
Yep. So I thank the MaxMD team. I need to sign off. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks good. I'm sorry, I've got to get to another DaVinci project meeting, but thanks for showing us this. I think it's encouraging, and we should, at least consider it further.
Thank you.
Okay, Elise, you still there?
Yes, I am. I just was talking on mute. So thanks very much, everybody, for your time. I will send out a link to the recording so you can re-review or share it with your friends. And thanks very much. If you think of anything else, just feel free to email me with questions, and we'll keep this dialogue going. Thank you, everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. All right, bye-bye.